I'm Becky Poole, host of the Ballad of Dena and Andrea, a podcast showcasing murder ballads and conversations in reaction to the story of Andrea Yates and Dena Schlosser, two women who murdered their children in the early 2000s. I wrote an album based on their story in the styles of Appalachian murder ballads and Americana to examine the story's cultural significance and create empathetic myths about these mothers. And, of course, to have sad songs do what sad songs do, help us process tragedy and grief. But the point of creating work from difficult material for me is to have conversations with people. So having a podcast come out along with the album seemed like a good idea. I've sat down with creators and artists and friends of mine to talk openly about the story, the songs, and their topics, like mental illness, religion, misogyny, motherhood, grief, women's health, writing about death, and a lot more. In each episode, I'll tell you a bit about the story, bring in a friend to chat, and share a song from the album. Please note, in this podcast, we will discuss postpartum psychosis and depression, domestic abuse, suicide, infanticide, and religious zealotry. Please take care of yourself while listening. Also note, when I use the word women, I aim to include anyone who has identified as a woman, female, or femme at any point in their journey. Okay, here we go. You've probably heard of Andrea Yates, the Houston woman who drowned her 5 children in their home bathtub. But you maybe haven't heard of Dena Schlosser of Plano, Texas. She's a woman who cut the arms off of her baby. In both cases, these women suffered from postpartum psychosis, and in both cases, the Bible told them to, along with a lot of other messaging and trauma. Dena and Andrea met while they were both in a North Texas state mental institution. Kind of seemed like, oh, hey, you killed your kids and she killed her kids, so we'll just leave you two alone. And Dena seemed more into it, and when a reporter asked her about Andrea, she said, "She's almost my identical personality. I think we'll be friends forever. I've only known her a short period of time, but I believe the feeling is mutual. She probably thinks that same thing." Andrea didn't say much about Dena. What do you think they talked about in that room? I imagine they talked about their baby girls, Mary and Margaret. Maybe they talked about church, the Bible, homeschooling their kids, or how they were taken off of antidepressants by their husbands, how they left careers and changed their lives to fit into new religious institutions, how they attempted suicide, or how postpartum psychosis felt. Or maybe they just stared at the same beige walls. I want to tell you briefly why I chose murder ballads to recount this story. There is just enough information and cultural curiosity about this story to create a solid myth about these women, which to me is what murder ballads are, true stories that become elevated to myth, warnings and reflections of a time. And although they might have just been used to simply spread news from town to town, these songs became bigger than just the facts. They are sprawling metaphors singing a tone of American life, of a culture of oppression, poverty, and mistakes. Some traditional American murder ballads stem from true stories brought over from Scotland, Ireland, and England, like years and years ago, and sung by those settlers in Appalachia. A good example of this migration is the song Two Sisters. Certain folk indexes have it estimated there are 500 versions of this song dating back centuries and even pre-Christianity. Musically, the form of a murder ballad is stripped down, simple, repetitive. A narrator, a melody, and a story. This focus puts the listeners, and I believe the singer, somewhere between a campfire and a trance. A lot of these songs are about a man killing a woman, as is the case in the homegrown classic Omi Wise, about John Lewis, a man who murdered a young woman named Naomi Wise in 1908. The truth of it is that he did it, ran, was arrested years later and convicted for something else, and never convicted for Naomi's murder. But in the song and its subsequent many versions, his myth is made. He gets varying endings, and she is always dead. The violence of men is expected in the songs. They're not being judged as other, monsters, or even wrong. Their story is just being heard. Women's existing narratives of violence seem too binary. They're victims, and they are monsters. With my murder ballad writing, I'm choosing to filter true contemporary stories of women perpetuating violence and the violence thrust upon them through pretty gritty songs to even the score a bit, sure, but also to tell more women-centered stories in this form, because I like it, and it's really sad and soothing. I'll talk to my therapist about that. For this initial interview, I wanted to talk to two of my friends who also tell stories about murder and create work in the podcast space. How do they do it? These guests are well-seasoned podcasters and just the most delightful and inspirational couple you've ever met. They've created so much art together, from visual art to musical theater to their initial podcast, Hella in Your 30s, to sketch comedy, which is how we met. Yes, doing sketch comedy in Chicago. I love how they tell stories with humor and care for each other, their audience, and the folks they're talking about. Join me now with Muriel Montgomery and Nick Casalini of the true crime humor podcast, Muriel's Murders.
Because we do comedy stuff. So I'm like trying not to be like a fucked up person, you know, also because I don't want like these stories are like, because of obviously like Andrea Yates, I had not heard Dena's story.
And nobody has.
Because Nick doesn't know anything about them. He's never heard either of the stories.
Oh.
Because our whole thing is like I picked the stories for him.
Yeah.
And I kind of know what will upset him. That's a story like I probably wouldn't tell him.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
then.
I told him in the car about like the ballad.
Oh, and that's the longest, most boring one, by the way.
It's beautiful though.
Yeah, let's just jump right into it. I'm going to say, so in Muriel's Murders, when you are thinking about what story you're going to use, how do you pick it?
Well, our shtick is I always pick stories for Nick. So specifically, I have an audience of one.
Right.
Which is my husband, who traditionally hates true crime.
Yeah. True crime was kind of grossing me out, but and I was never into it. But then during the pandemic, when we needed to get space from each other, we would plug in our headphones and just like go have our different podcast life for an hour and a half.
Yeah, we got real sick of each other.
and then she'd be like, "Oh yeah, listen to this true crime," and I was like, "Ugh." But then I'd want to.
What would happen also is that like one of us would inevitably connect to the Bluetooth speaker.
Oh shit!
So then it would like come on, and Nick would be like, "What are you listening to?"
And I found myself really enjoying Muriel's versions of what she was listening to.
Yeah, but not what was actually happening.
The actual
Yeah.
Well, there is a vibe to true crime that really turns me off, and like and that's what I like about yours. I mean, it's charming, obviously, but it also like really sets up the audience in a way, the audience that is not Nick, to be like, oh, you're right. This is two people sharing something. It creates another level where you can be kind of separate from the awfulness of it.
Yeah.
And not in a bad way, in a good way, that you can like hear a story. Yeah.
I feel you on that. Like what I'm really curious, like what turns you off? Because I think maybe you and I have the same thing.
Oh, about true crime?
Yeah. Like if you were to say like typically.
There's like an over-dramatic voice to it, but also, oh God, well, I brought this up and then now I can't finish the answer.
Is it kind of like the music too? Like sometimes I'll listen to it. Like I started off with Sword and Scale. Like between the two of us, Nick and I, like I've listened to every big true crime podcast. Yeah. Like since I started listening to them years and years and years ago.
You were a fan before it was cool? Yeah.
It was really uncool, and Muriel's there for it.
I started with Sword and Scale, all the problematic ones, but like, you know, all of like the scored dramatic music and the kind of like evil, you know, like, I mean, I've listened to all of it, and I can kind of say like, I know what he listens to and doesn't like.
Yeah. I don't want to hear how awful someone was. I'm going to give you the real answer. I want like abolishment of prisons. You know what I mean? Yeah. And you can't start there. No one is going to have restorative justice if we're just entertained by how what a villain that person is.
That's kind of like when we were talking a little bit about the questions you sent us ahead of time, and that was one thing. I think like
cheaters.
Like I think really what it comes down to is that like when you talk about good and evil and people being monsters and angels and that kind of thing, you get into this really reductivist space, you know, where you're like not able to really tell the story of what happened. And like Nick and I do a comedy podcast, and I think a lot of people have feelings one way or the other. Like in our intro for our podcast, we're like, if you don't like that, just turn it off. I think that at this point, true crime has like a place in the world and in the ether and in the zeitgeist, and like it's here, and we talk about it, and we joke about it, we laugh about it, and we think about it, and we have all kinds of ways of having thoughts about it. And
murder ballads were like true crime stories. They were the first true crime podcasts.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, I mean,
they
nailed Jesus to the cross and everyone's been talking about it nonstop, Like, if someone gets hurt, someone's going to be like, hey, did you hear about that? Like, that was crazy. He got knocked out. Like, like, it's always going to be that.
Yeah.
So we can...
It's almost just like we're going to talk about, like, that's news, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so why do we think it's entertainment? Why do we think it's okay for us, you guys and me, to talk about someone else's horrible life or horrible things?
Because we've been doing it forever. And I think it's because humans are kind of terrible. We kind of don't want to think we are, but we are. And it's a part of, everything that it's like to be a human. We're not great.
No.
We're kind of crazy, narcissistic, terrible people.
Right. And we don't see each other as humans.
No, we just are, it's like capitalism and all this gnarly stuff.
Yeah. Oh my God, I love how much capitalism has come up in all of the interviews.
Oh God.
It's a part of human nature to be terrible, capitalism, all those things. And I think we do it in children's fairy tales. We do it in all of our religions. We do it in stories that we tell each other. We do it to fables to warn each other.
Yep.
We do it in teachings. We do it in gossip. We do it in, even ways to convey positive things about other people. Like at least, in comparisons, it's just it has a place in almost everything we do and in nature.
Yeah.
It just exists in everything that we do,
Yeah. Life and death, it's just the only two things we have besides taxes.
Yeah.
If you're alive, you probably were born and you're going to die.
Yeah. Those are the two things we know are kind of true. And then everything is kind of in between. It's how do you get from point A to point B?
I feel like there's an element that scares me a bit about controlling a story, controlling a narrative. I think of fairy tales and how the Grimm fairy tales are so different from Disney fairy tales, and they just make a culture think something different.
Yeah.
And princesses or the witches of fairy tales were totally different and a totally different story, and then you get the Disneyfied version that makes women just be oh, if I'm skinny and fall asleep, I should just be kissed and I'd be happy with it.
Yeah.
That's how I wake up.
That is really interesting to think about, this resurgence of true crime in, the last 10 years or something like that, and, what that's done for women. If that's done a Disneyfication of true crime to some extent, or at least, this, a way of kind of culturally making us think about it. That's so fascinating. I hadn't really thought of that.
Well, and I wonder if it's almost it may be the opposite of women grappling with how to be. I think of it's very funny, and it was one that got so popular.
My favorite murder.
Yeah. And how it was no, we're talking about it because watch out, be safe. That was the.
I think the thing is though, I learned stuff.
Yes.
I mean, I genuinely think that was a huge reason why I got hooked on true crime in the first place is because we're taught as women. I mean, I know Nick is the best. You're just sitting here, but I think too, because we talk about this, but specifically as women, we're taught to be polite. I mean, that was also a big thing in Crime Junkie is you're taught to be polite and to ignore red flags. And I've been with friends and I've been by myself and I've done just gotten into the car to be polite, let somebody walk with me to be polite, especially when I was younger, done lots of things against, my better judgment to be polite.
Yep.
And I think really genuinely listening to some of these programs and getting that validation to kind of say, my instinct is valid.
Yeah.
Was really empowering for a while, listening to them. And I do think that there is something about it where I would get personally, and I think for other people it was really draining, and it's not a one size fits all, but
for sure,
I definitely felt yes, that did happen to me, or I remember having that feeling, and thinking I'm thankful that nothing happened to me, but I really wish that I had said no in that moment.
Right.
I wish I had walked away
just
in that moment.
Even if it was just for comfort's sake.
Yeah.
I remember in the subway in New York thinking that so many times.
Yeah.
It's just I'm the only person in here with this dude. And being well, don't hurt his feelings. Oh my God, get up, walk out, go to the other subway car.
Just get out.
Yes.
Wait for the next train.
Yeah.
Just get out. It's weird to like think about that.
I don't believe in God, but I do. I would love to ask a question of when was I the closest to death and didn't know it?
Oh, I know. I think about that all the time.
Right?
Yeah. Hell yeah. I was like, oh man, I'll like shudder sometimes. Like, oh, I remember that thing like 12 years ago. Remember I made that left onto like Fairfax without really looking or whatever crazy ass thing. You're just like, oh my God.
Yeah.
I'm sure I was close to death 100 times.
Right?
You know?
Yeah.
It's just like, oh God.
Yeah.
Smoking sherm.
Yeah. Smoking sherm. Get your ass.
It was an accident. I was 19. It was the tunnel.
Oh my God, you're so cool.
I love that. Yep.
Oh man, we just did an episode on the Club Kids, and it was really great.
What one? Because I'm on the French guy.
Oh yeah, the one that was really fun. I think we just released the second part.
I hate it when
I know I
Muriel says
started
stories are fun. I told her not to
'Cause
even
they're
say
not.
that.
Yeah, you told me
She
not
said,
to
oh,
say
it's
that.
so fun. Like, and then she'll explain something. It's like, what is fun about it? And I understand what she's saying, which is like,
I
it's
like
going to
that
be
story. I
fun
think it was really
to tell
interesting.
you about it.
Yes.
You know?
Well, that is something that once you get close to the material and you've kind of desensitized to the material, it is so easy to do that, to be like, oh, you got to hear this story.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. And you forget that it's like, oh, this is sad shit.
Yeah. You know, I think like one of the things besides picking a story out for Nick that I'm interested in when I pick out a story is the historical time period, the community, the kind of cultural moment that the event, the crime happened in, plays a lot into the types of things that I like to talk about.
Yeah.
And I think
you can totally tell that in your show too. I love it. I'm always like, Jesus, how much research did you do?
She does a lot.
do
She does a lot of
for a
research. She
comedy
does.
podcast.
Our
It's
life
like
would
a
be so much easier if she didn't. She just like phoned it in, like at least like 2 episodes a month. You know, she doesn't phone in anything. This girl is just going off. She'll read a book and she'll completely restructure the whole story and do 1 million extra articles.
Oh man.
And then she's like really like also not one to adopt the point of view of the author.
Oh, that's
a
cool.
lot.
Yeah.
You know, she'll be like, "Oh yeah, I got all this information and it was good," but their whole angle I either don't think is interesting or not unethical or whatever the thing is. But
well, a lot of the time, I think just to finish, like close that thought,
Sure.
I think like, you know, when you talk about something being fun or interesting, it's kind of like about the whole machine that made this moment. You know, like the event is horrifying, right? But when you kind of go like 7 degrees of separation out and you think about like, for instance, you know, Andrea Yates, the whole like...
The religious structure she was under, the fact that she had depression, the fact that she tried to kill herself a bunch of times. It's not just the story of who done it, right? It's like what fucking was happening.
Right, and like Reagan and the Left Behind books and like the new version of Christianity that was like coming out of the 80s and like how that's completely different than what her parents knew, you know, and like what like, you know, like these new ways of like expressing religion. And like when you look at that specific time period and what they were doing, it starts to paint this like really specific, interesting picture of like what she was going through. And I think the more you zoom out, it has to become interesting. It just is. I don't find that to be disrespectful. You know, I just think it's like building out the whole, like it gives you more context for what happened.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah.
That's another thing that's hard, I think, like with the good and evil, like that reductive sort of thing. That's the thing when you're reading these books, it's really wild. Like it's really hard to find source material that's not like also very reductive. Like you can read good books that do good research and they just want to be like, and she was there for the money. And then you're just like, she kind of, you don't know that.
Yeah, you don't know that. Exactly. Right. Even if it's like the awfulest awful thing, putting words into people's mouths as they ask a question.
Yeah.
And like, that kind of stuff bugs me. Has there been a story that you're like, this is interesting to me, and been like, wow, I can't, I'm not going to tackle this one?
Yeah, a lot. There's been a lot of those.
And what makes that decision for you? It's too scary for Nick.
A lot of times the killers that Muriel tells stories about generally are really larger than life, sort of absurd characters that kind of like just fail a lot and are generally like pretty, like for lack of a better word, stupid, and then do this horrible thing.
We were like, yeah, we killed him. Yeah, oh, no, we killed him good.
Yeah, it's like people are dumb as hell. And like generally speaking, I would say what Muriel doesn't tend to do is like really intense stalker stories where it's just like a person is like fixated on one person and just sort of like, it's just, everything is sad. I was going to say, and it's just too sad. And I don't really mean that because all of our stories that end in these tragedies, I don't know, like a lot of this killing someone is like generally a really stupid thing to do. So probably that wasn't the first stupid ass decision they made,
Oh
so like what are all the other weird ways they thought they were going to come up in the world and what ways did they succeed, who was this, and what people bought into whatever confidence they were putting out in the world or whatever the thing may be. We get a lot of listener suggestions. We love our listeners. They're like so wonderful. And a lot of times our listener suggestions are the most sort of like violent, crazy ones. Whoa. So Muriel will be like, this one's from so-and-so. And we're like, all right, let's get ready because it's going to be really, really drastic.
I think when people are just extraordinarily mentally ill. Oh, I have someone like Andrea Yates, you get to this...
didn't know. She didn't want to kill her kids. That's the whole freaking point.
I think when you get to this point where like there's just no culpability, it starts to feel like slamming a hand in a car door. Like it just feels like not really, on some level, it doesn't feel like true crime, even though it is in this sense. It's like, there's a piece of it that like, it's so hard. And it is true crime, but it's like...
it's totally different.
Yeah, it's so different.
And I think that's why I really do kind of try to separate the idea of true crime and this podcast, because I don't think it is. I think it's something different, but
it is.
There are intersections, right?
Andrea Yates she is like a true crime. Like she's a star of that. I mean, it's like undeniably a subject of so many... Right. So like people do categorize her as that. But
it's just as a monster and as that, right? Yeah.
But it's hard, Those are the ones I had a friend of mine, his mother went to elementary school with a guy who went on a killing spree in California, and he was schizophrenic, and he was having religious hallucinations. And it was like, the story is really incredible, and it's very undertold, and she was willing to do an interview with me, and I was just reading through it, and I just was like, it checks so many boxes of the types of stories we do, but I was just like, I can't.
What you do well in the podcast is entertain while also being respectful, and that it'd be difficult to do that.
Yeah.
So I have a question. Why do you think we're respectful?
Because I like you and you're my friends. No, but I do. I think that you are because you come at it sincerely. You're sharing a story with people. Really, a lot of it has to do with your relationship and how you respect each other. It's full of love, the podcast, and also like that you're sharing a story with people. You're not taking an opinion or trying to be a journalist or put drama on it. This is fucking crazy. This interests me, and you just nailed it by having your relationship. I think that's what I would say.
So nice, and I'm not sure why Nick asked that question, but I do appreciate that because sometimes I'm like, I don't know. I hope we're not really disrespectful.
I know, yeah. That's why I want to ask that. I mean, we'll get some we get reviews and people tell us like we bring like humanity to it and things like that, and obviously that's not on accident. Like we wouldn't do it if we felt like we couldn't make that happen.
You're never making fun of the people who have died.
Yeah. No, right. Yeah, right. So I guess maybe that's obvious. I'm like, we would never do that, right?
Right.
But it's like, well, maybe some people would. I don't know.
I think some people would, and I think there would be no reverence for life.
I think also, we've had violence in our life, and I have grew up with kids that got murdered, and the first girl I knew who got murdered, I was in a very young elementary school kid. And I have people that were very, very special to my heart who will never be let out of prison for murdering people. So we also just know I mean, we obviously haven't been murdered, but it's not, it's like we've also felt the ramifications of violence, and we're both very extremely non-violent people. Like if I get into a confrontation with someone, or if there's like a physical thing that goes down, even if I was right and I was awesome in this situation and he deserved it and I'm the best and whatever, like I always regret it. Like we're deeply
I'm getting rosacea, IBS. I'm going inside.
We're like
oh yeah, I will. I'm a barker, but no. Once it comes to, I'll be like, no, you're right. Let's just figure this out. Let's talk it through, guys.
Yeah, we're like, we are like truly, deeply non-violent people.
Yeah.
Like we're absolutely peace-loving people in like a very real, true way.
But that comes through for sure.
And then the flip side of that is we've known tragedy. I've sobbed at funerals. So like that. So that's just who we are and who I am. Mm-hmm. So it's impossible to have that not be on anything where I'm attempting to have any sort of authenticity.
It's hard to know when you're making things like this and you're interested in true crime and you're making true crime projects. It's really hard to thread the needle of like knowing. You always have this kernel of, is this okay?
Yeah, like what am I putting out into the world?
Yeah, and what am I taking from it? And like what is this doing to me? And
is someone hearing that and hearing the exact opposite of what I want to say?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and they might be, and that's the death of the author situation.
Well, yeah, and like it's complicated. Like these are not journalistic endeavors.
Right, like this is not a documentary. No. There's some facts from it, but
they're like artistic, they're comedic, or they're explorative, and they're kind of about human nature. And, but the tricky thing is that even with all that, there's still these huge ideas and like huge philosophical ideas. And so like, even though it's light or maybe not light, mm-hmm. like maybe it's meant to just be taken. Like it's not meant to be taken in an academic setting. Sure. It's just meant to be taken, but we have a gut, like it's like anybody listening, your audience, even if they're just there to kind of just be like, oh, interesting. I just love to listen to pop my earbuds in. I'm going to clean my house and listen to murder ballads, it's like they still have a gut reaction. And it's weird because, their gut reaction is really intelligent. And like sometimes you can make a bunch of these, you kind of don't know until it gets out into the ether. And people have a bunch of gut reactions. And, like, it's scary sometimes because it's such a loaded thing.
For sure. The gut reaction. I have forgot the gut reaction of people who had children, or just the immediate reaction of people to be like, children are the most important. Mm-hmm. And like, yes, that is, you don't fucking hurt children.
It's a weird thing to argue against.
And I'm not arguing against it, right? I'm saying like, we already know that's the absolute worst thing. Right. That is bad. And I just was like, can we focus on these women?
Yeah.
Otherwise, more children are going to end up this way.
Yeah.
If we don't deal with postpartum psychosis and really taking women seriously, not ignoring them, not subjugating them through religion. Like, God damn. Yeah. God damn. While we're just steeped in this dark material, do you have tricks or tools that you use to kind of like stay out of the darkness? Or is it separate anyway because it's a job?
I guess I just think it's like the news.
Sure.
Like for me, it's not. There are certain stories that are harder than others. I've done a few multi-part series on serial killers. There's like really particular stories. There's like the Texas killing fields.
Oh God, yes.
And like, I think it's like the I-35 corridor. It's the corridor between Houston and Galveston. And there's just like this area where there's just women were just being killed for like decades. And, it was just so relentless. And I spent a really long time learning them, and there are just so many, and it was just so ridiculous that no one was stopping it. And I think there was just something about that was really difficult. Like I found myself kind of like being really drained at the end of the day. And I, with those, like I just don't do very many cases like that, For the most part, like I think it genuinely doesn't affect me you know, I spend like a good chunk of my day. I probably spend 5 days a week between 6 and 8 hours a day on this type of material.
Yeah.
And then like I can spend, you know, maybe 2/3 of that is like researching.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, it's interesting. It's almost like that is the tool. It's the like you're working out your feelings through that.
Yeah, she's not just consuming it, right? It's not just consumption. And then also the other thing is like what Muriel is saying is it's basically a full-time job for her to do this show. And there's another one next week. So, like, you can't just be like, wow, that Galveston thing, I'm devastated. It's like, I got to go on to the next one. You know? She turns them and burns them. You know?
I do a ton of supplemental research. So, actually, like, the thing is, too, is most of the time I learn about something, and then it's like, like 3 hours learning about. When I did the Galveston, Texas stuff, I was like learning about like the oil boom in Houston and like all of the crazy overnight millionaires, like oil barons that were like crashing planes and buying like 8 cars. And you learn about like these crazy periods of time and the eras and what people were wearing and like what they were watching on TV and like what the Denny's was like. And, you know, like then when it crashed and then you think about like what the economy was like and what the pictures look like and how to describe them.
Because like right now those sections are definitely still here. Those swaths of the country still exist.
Yeah.
And hopefully by talking about the past it will bring up the present and have a little bit more
some change
light on it, some change. Yeah.
And I do think like I think that that's really true about thinking about these types of things that are horrible, right? Mm-hmm. And then just like remembering them, you know? Like, I mean, just because they're horrible, it's like, remember them. They happen.
They happen, right? They're a part of this fabric.
Yeah, and it's ridiculous that it happened. Like, if you think about it, it's like, okay, yes, it's horrific, and then it's tragic, and also it's insane that nobody cared. Right. And I think if you can tap in, if it sparks something in your brain to think like that's ridiculous, it's obscene, it's absurd, and we start like kind of saying like other things that make you kind of remember it, you know, and like you attach it to other ridiculous things, then maybe like you're just like, that's something that you would tell somebody about.
Yeah. Or some of the things happen like before the internet, right?
Yeah.
It's like surely if somebody could have Googled A and B, they would know that this doctor was doing this all over the country or whatever. But then why does it still happen? And why these ridiculous oversights that still occur? I mean, I guess we're back to capitalism and evil people.
And humans, you know, it just keeps repeating because we don't care.
Like, we're just like predictable animals.
Yeah. We're panicky, predictable. I think probably like talking to each other is talking and listening. I mean, like podcasts, like people were saying that's going to be this huge fad and it's going to be done and whatever. And it's like people want other people's voices in their ear.
Yeah, they do. Please talk to me. Yeah. Please put your human voice in my human ear. Yeah. I mean, for a while, and then it's going to be AI, so.
Oh, man, that's going to be weird.
We tried to do an episode on our Patreon where we asked it to write a true crime thing for us, and it was so bad. It was
good.
It was really just so bad.
So bad. Weirdly sexy.
I mean, I can't imagine if you're taking from all of the internet that everything isn't just like cock. And then you put its cock in the butt.
You know, I think that's the thing. Yeah, it's like, because we say that all the time. It's like people were behaving all these ways before the internet, and now there's the internet, and people are still stupid. It's like, well, because the internet's pretty stupid too, you know?
Exactly.
It's pretty dumb.
We're just dumb.
We are. I just don't believe we have to stay there. But then also, like, I love a fart joke.
I love a fart joke. Are you kidding?
Is there an allure to divulging a secret? To being like, hey, let me tell you the story and you're going to fucking brawl.
Yes. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I love telling you.
Muriel's really good at that. All of our family wants that from her. People want that from Muriel specifically.
And you're good at it.
She's good at
my ADHD brain will be like, and then there was this thing and then the other thing. And then like 15 years before that. So I have to do tiny bits and do songs.
No, Muriel's one of those people where she'll tell you the synopsis of a short story or something. And then you'll go ahead and read it later. And you'll be like, damn, the way Muriel said it was way better.
You know? I did it once. I told this story about this Mormon documentary, and then the people who made the Mormon documentary was like, you did a good job with that. They hit me up on Twitter.
That's fucking great. Oh my God.
It's great, man. I love telling a secret, especially when you can kind of be like, I love telling a
when
secret.
you can like meet it out, right?
It's like very like flirty. It's like, well, I'll tell you something you don't know. Because I do that all the time. This is my favorite part of podcasts.
Yeah, you're really good at it.
It's very fun.
Do you think that comes from a writing background or your acting background? Or maybe just it's you and you can't put a finger on it?
I think it comes from Muriel will be the life of the party, like at family functions and stuff. Yeah. Everyone wants a piece of Muriel.
I think it's like
that's what it
like
comes from.
It
comes
background.
from, yeah.
It's like a very like
a teasing background.
It's like a...
Yeah, she's not a writer. She's a teaser. She's put her 10,000 hours into teasing.
In the very beginning, we were talking about how, like, part of what makes you respectful as a podcast is, like, you have this experience with tragedy and with murder. I finally got the spark to do this show because of working in the juvenile prisons.
Mm-hmm.
On the face of it, it doesn't seem like it makes sense together, but that definitely was the, like, gee, talk about shit. Do it. Just do it. There's so much suffering and so much tragedy and so much systemic shit that causes it.
Yeah, and also, like, we joke about this, but, you know, I don't know, maybe this is off topic. We're not the right thing, the right way to respond to that. But sometimes it's just interesting to spend your time thinking about that instead of your own damn problems.
Fuck yes.
You know?
Oh, God,
you know,
yes.
You can kick the can down the line a little bit, learning about, you know, what's wrong with, you know, something happened 80 years ago or something. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. I mean, there is I feel like I guess maybe what I'm saying is you're coming at it from sort of like a justice reform point of view with that. And I think what we do a lot of times is escapism, I guess.
Yeah.
My gut reaction was that I think just objectively, I feel like there's something about like the systemic feeling about working with kids in this situation where like you just kind of can see the generational trauma coming through and the ballad. To me, like when I hear these ballads, they seem like a timeless story because there's something that just will always repeat. You know, like there's something that is just kind of constantly going to be something that's cyclical that'll come through over and over again that's going to be applicable kind of throughout the ages. And then it's also this sort of like musically repetitive, you know, sort of thing.
Absolutely. That's so much of murder ballads. It's just like story, repetition, and like...
I mean, I can see...
almost trance-like.
Yeah.
Is there a murder ballad that sort of transcended and crossed over into like pop culture? Like just one that's...
absolutely.
Like what? Like what's one that I would know?
In the Pines, Nirvana. I'm thinking of like
my girl.
That's super. That's a traditional murder ballad. Hey Joe, Jimi Hendrix. That's it has a background in a traditional. Oh God, there's so many. Nick Cave did a whole record called Murder Ballads that is all traditionals, but made to his sound. It's fucking awesome.
Yeah.
Basically, almost every artist has a murder ballad in their repertoire. I feel like it's just yes, tons of crossover, but I because I think it is such an elemental form of music that the storytelling, the folk. The reason I wanted to write murder ballads in general, and specifically this story, is like taking a contemporary story and using that old style so that we're creating new myth, so that maybe it's not about a dead woman shoved into a river who ends up in a mill.
Yeah.
Maybe it's something different. It might not be the woman winning, but at least it's her story. Yeah, her story, her narrative. There's the Omi Wise is a traditional one where like he gets free or he confesses and gets caught, but he always gets a different story and she's always dead, which is the truth. But like, why not just one example? Her myth is that she gets to live. And like, that's sort of an exercise, but I think it led to this more of like, contemporary stories, I'll do that. This is the last question I'm going to ask everybody. What is an organization or a podcast or an artist that you think is doing some good work out there?
Well, I, right now, got really into this podcast.
What?
It's called Ear Hustle.
Oh my God, I love Ear Hustle.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
I think that they just do really interesting work. the whole thing is about like it just follows incarcerated people at San Quentin and what it's like to live there and what it's like to be incarcerated and, over the years, and they'll follow them through COVID and the lockdowns. It's just a really unique, interesting podcast. And they have a huge archive, so you can start at the beginning. It's interesting. A lot of their people get pardoned along the way. Yeah. So if you start at the beginning, you get to go through. There is a true crime element, so if you're interested in that, I hate to say it like that. It's not really about that. But if you're interested in true crime, I think that there's a connection to that, that I think would be really interesting to a lot of people. Oh, and I also am listening to this other one called The New Guru, which is not at all as what would I say?
It's a little bit more
beautiful. Prestige. Yeah. Not as all as prestige, but it's really, really interesting.
It's a little Skinamax, not HBO.
The premise is just all about how like the internet has spurred this new movement of gurus and like this culture of guru. And I find it to be fascinating.
We just can't fucking let that guru shit go.
We really
We just want fucking Jesus.
That's hilarious. I never thought of it like that. We just want Jesus. He exists, guys. You could just go to church. Or
you're going to break free from religion, but then go to but this guy.
Yeah, right.
It's fantastic. We want, and it's so much related to what we just talked about in this conversation today. It's just we just want it, Because
we always, it's so funny. Like if someone is good or great, they're not, right? Yes. And Muriel will always start these stories where she'll tell someone, she'll be describing someone who's beloved by their community. My cynical ass is how many bodies do they have? Literally,
exactly. That's what I mean.
Who hates them?
About this community, this conversation. That's what I mean. Is that we're humans. We're just always like this. We're just terrible.
We're just terrible.
Well, I'll go ahead and shout out the Good Stuff podcast, which I had the pleasure of being a producer on, and there's a really incredible stories of people's perseverance and just all different people from all different walks of life. And for those that are looking for a true crime bent to it, people have survived some pretty horrifying acts of violence that we interview and talk to, and what it's like to be alive now. And every episode is uplifting, basically. And it's weird because I would say feel good inspo content, I would never want to be a part of that, but that's what this show is, and I'm super proud of it. It's really special, and the Good Stuff podcast, you know what I mean?
That's awesome. It's so funny because if I were to actually feel good, inspo, positivity, it absolutely would be you guys. So, but
I know,
not in that way.
I know.
Exactly.
People will be like, "Oh man, I just listened to you and to cheer me up." I'll be like, "What?" Okay, cool.
You're like, I am Pagliacci.
Hilarious, man. Yeah, we love the podcast thing is really amazing. The listeners are just so intimately involved in it, and they're right to be. It is an intimate thing to really listen along to a show. And, sadly, it's sort of a one-way street. Any people that really listen to us do kind of know us. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't make it to the airwaves, and we keep a lot of things private. But they know a pretty real slice of us very intimately for people who really listen.
Yeah.
And that's amazing. It's so cool. It's the only art form that we've done where that is true.
Yeah. If I were to have a parasocial relationship with anyone, a podcast is the easiest way.
Yeah,
for sure.
It's a wild. It's fun. I mean, it's the podcast is the way to do it.
Oh my God, I'm Jamie Loftus is my best friend.
Yeah, right.
She knows who I am.
Me and Ira Glass are just weighing it together. I'm like, Ira, come on, man, you know how to do this.
It does, and knowing you fucks me up that way too, because I'll be like, oh yeah, because I actually know you. So I'm like, oh yeah, that's how it is with all podcasts.
It's so funny. Even people will just be texting with friends. First of all, it's amazing that anyone who knows us loves this podcast. Because we've been making stuff for so long that I just expect people. To me, the only reasonable response to Nick and Muriel making something is You know, like, Jesus, it's been a long time. You guys still making stuff,
still
like,
doing
not
that?
into it, you know? And then,
You found a thing that works.
this is the one that people that we know and love and are either our family members or friends, like you know, are like tuned into. And the thing is like no one pity listens to a podcast.
No, you
right?
don't have to.
You're just not going to a play and clapping on opening night. Good job. Drink the wine. Bye. You know, fucking thing sucked, you know?
That was great.
Yeah, and there's no face-to-face reward, you know what I mean? But the funny part, too, is, like, just we'll get a text, like, it'll be someone I text with, you know, we're, like, having a conversation, and then they'll just ask a question, and I'll be like, I have no idea what they're talking about. And it'll be an episode from, like, a year and a half ago.
I'm sure I've sent you messages that were like, Becky, you got a lot of Beckys in these podcasts.
And then people will really be like asking us questions like, what was Carlton's secret? We're just like, I don't remember. We've done 130 episodes since that one. I have no idea.
Thanks again.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having
that
us.
Was so fun.
So great. And watch. Wow, I really fucked that up. Make sure to listen to Muriel's Murders wherever you listen to your podcast.
Yeah.
And also go back and listen to Hella in Your 30s. Because, oh my God, you're just going to fucking eat these two up. I can't not talk about eating babies. And now here comes this episode's song. It's not funny. In fact, the songs are not funny. The interview stuff is funny because it's people talking. But the songs, they're murder ballads. Come on. This song is an overview of Dena and Andrea's story in a sprawling epic murder ballad. Other songs coming up on the podcast are more produced and might lean more Americana over ballad, but this one is tradish. It's a cappella, repetitive, substantial. Strap in, get uncomfortable for the Ballad of Dena and Andrea. Tonight I tell the tale of two women and their strife, both devoted to the Lord and took their children's lives. Andrea Yates from Houston is the name you probably know. Police found her babies wet and breathing no more. She was a valedictorian, worked as a registered nurse, married Rusty, and they followed a preacher who said she was cursed. She gave birth to 4 babies, and after the 4th one, her doctor told her no more on account of depression. But along came baby Mary, the only little girl, who knew then that she would have only 6 months on this world. Andrea tried to kill herself many times with pills and knives, restrained herself so hard you could see bruises on her thighs. Again the doctor ordered her to be chaperoned. Rusty thought it'd be okay if he left them all home. She begged her husband not to leave her alone with their kids. He smiled and said, "You love them," turned around and left he did. In under 1 hour, she had filled the tub and taken all the lives of the babies that she loved. Her husband Rusty peered in to the house window. "Andrea, what have you done?" as if he couldn't have known. Dena Schlosser is the woman who you may not know. Some call her the baby chopper of Plano. Dena has her bachelor's in the School of Psychology, worked at a daycare center, and started a family. They joined a church whose pastor says medicine is a sin and commands that women should silently obey their men. Her husband John, he told her that she could work no more. Then he lost his job, and so it goes, they ended up poor. A day after baby Maggie came into this world, Dena fell into despair. Her mind began to swirl. She ran away from home, and she slit her wrists. Since they took her off her meds, she could see the apocalypse. Blood in the streets and demons as she cut off Maggie's arms was Dena's final vision to save her from Satan's harms. These two women were set up with beds in North Texas. Strangers, but now roommates, shut away from all of us. Postpartum psychosis was a card that they were dealt. What was happening in their bodies? What was it they felt? Their crimes for us so ghoulish, for them their worst mistake. How do you know for sure that if broken, no lives you'd take? If you'd like more information on postpartum psychosis and depression, please go to postpartum.net. There are additional links to mental health, safety, and reproductive resources in the show notes here, as well as links to information mentioned in the show. You can listen to the full album of songs for the Ballad of Dena and Andrea on Spotify and Apple or wherever you listen to your music. Songs were written by me, Becky Poole, and produced by award-winning multi-instrumentalist, folk musician, and incredible producer, Abby Posner. Find her at abbyposner.com. Theme also composed and played by Abby. Special thank you to Evan Mosher for sound sweetening, Julie Rosing for help producing, and to Andrew and the team at Voice Tracks West in Los Angeles. Thank you so much for listening, and please join me in future episodes as we explore more themes in the Ballad of Dena and Andrea.